Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Securing Local Elected Officials endorsement session. I'm just going to get started sharing my screen here. I'm very excited to be here today. If we haven't met, my name is Kestin Bazinovich and I'm Citizens Climate Lobby's Executive Assistant. And it's been such a privilege to support all your amazing grassroots efforts the past 3 years that I've been with CCL. So we also have two wonderful panelists with us today, Beth Chajes and Brian Ettling. And our goal today is to give an overview of why it's so important to secure local elected official endorsements, to go over some strategies for how to do this work, and to share some successes from the field. And we will have time at the end for questions. So if you do have any questions throughout the session, please put them in the Q&A tab. And also please upvote any questions that you'd like answered that have already been posted there. So first, why are we talking about local elected officials? As we know, 2021 is a critical year to pass federal climate legislation. And that's why we're thinking about how to be even more strategic and focused with the work that we're doing this year. So the grasstops outreach you all do at the local level is so important. It shows that the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act and carbon fee and dividend policies are not only supported by those that our members of Congress represent, but also that they're politically viable, which we can showcase through endorsements from local elected officials. And prioritizing local elected officials is especially important in grasstops outreach because they often have connections with and influence upon their members of Congress. And climate change impacts are happening close to home in their city, county, or state, which is the jurisdiction that they're responsible for. And since you voted them into office, locally elected officials will likely be receptive to your meeting request and to listen to your concerns. And you've already been doing such a great job with this work. CCL volunteers have already secured over 140 bill endorsements from state level legislators and over 230 endorsements from city and county elected officials since the Energy Innovation Act was first introduced at the end of 2018. And before we pass it off to our wonderful panelists, we wanted to highlight a really exciting recent success in Utah. So about 1 week ago, an op-ed was published in Salt Lake City's Utah Desert News, where 25 Utah Republicans endorsed carbon fee and dividend as the best way to effectively cut greenhouse gas emissions. And 19 of those Republicans are actually current members of the Utah legislature. So this endorsement and the op-ed were initiated by a group of Utah volunteers and supporters who've been working on this effort since last November. And it's just a great example of how grasstops outreach with local elected officials can show our members of Congress that there is support for this policy at multiple levels of government. And on that positive note, I'm going to pass it over to our panelists who will give a quick background of the unique political landscape within their states. And then we'll dive into their successes and advice on securing state legislator endorsements. So Beth Chajes has been active in CCL since she founded the Wilmington-Newark Chapter in 2016. Beth took on the additional role of Delaware State Coordinator in 2017, and she's had some amazing success in Delaware with gaining grasstops endorsers since posing a statewide challenge in the fall of 2020. And Brian Ettling is a 9-year volunteer with CCL and has been active in the Portland, Oregon chapter since 2017. This past year, Brian has led efforts to gain endorsements from Oregon state legislators and to pass a resolution in the Oregon Senate. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Beth and Brian. Beth, do you want to just give us an overview of the political landscape you're working in?
Sure. Thanks, Kestin, and I'm really excited to be here today as part of this panel. Delaware is an interesting place, and I've lived here for 30 years. But prior to that, I lived in some big states. And what I discovered when I moved here was that politics in a small state can be quite a different ballgame. It's really a much more retail, in-person politics kind of situation. We have less than 1 million residents spread out in 3 counties, although the population is heavily concentrated in the northernmost county. And we're all united in 1 congressional district. So there is a culture of really close contact with our elected officials. I never met my representatives when I lived in California or Texas, but it's really not unusual to bump into them here in Delaware just on the street. I once ran into Joe Biden when he was a senator at my local supermarket, where he was outside campaigning with the local candidate for state legislature. We have a really long tradition of moderate politics in the state, with a bit of a revolving door between the various statewide positions. For example, our Senator Carper used to be our governor, and our current governor used to be our congressman. And after elections, we still hold a ceremony where we literally bury a hatchet physically in the ground. But like much of the country, there has been some polarization in recent years, and there's a bit of a north-south divide. I mentioned that about 2/3 of the population live in the more urban northern county, which is really part of the Philadelphia metro area, and that county is very blue. And the 2 southern counties are more rural and red. And currently, we're one of the few states where all statewide offices are occupied by Democrats. And as of the last election, there are supermajorities of Democrats in both chambers of our legislature. Our Senate has 21 seats and our House has 41. Republicans who manage to hold office in the northern county tend to be more moderate in their positions on things like energy and the environment than their southern counterparts.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Brian, how about Oregon?
Yes, my name is Brian Ettling, and unlike Beth, I've only lived in Oregon for about 4 years. Now, I was a seasonal park ranger at Crater Lake National Park in Southern Oregon for 25 years, but I was really mostly involved with Citizens Climate Lobby in St. Louis, in kind of a conservative red district in South St. Louis County. So when my wife moved to Portland, Oregon in February 2014, I was like, well, what am I going to do in the bright blue bubble of Portland? And so I had this great idea of doing a state tour, a CCL state tour of the most conservative parts of Oregon. Now when folks think of Oregon, they tend to think of Portland and that Willamette Valley, Portland, Salem, Eugene, which makes Oregon a blue state, but most of Oregon is really red. So I did about 11 cities in about 12 days on this tour. And before I left on this tour, the state coordinator of Oregon, Danelle Broad, said, I need you to also promote the state solution. So for years in Oregon, they've been working on a cap and invest bill. And so then I started promoting it on the tour, and I started digging into it. And I really got involved on the state level of trying to get a cap and invest bill passed. Because my thinking was that if Oregon can pass a state level carbon pricing bill, that creates a patchwork problem where some states have carbon pricing and others don't. And then hopefully Congress would step in and pass the energy innovation, our federal fee and dividend. And so in this process of going to Salem and lobbying, I got to know a lot of the Oregon legislators. I developed friendships. I really liked them. And I got quite invested in our cap and invest bill. Now, we did have the votes to pass the bills in 2019 and 2020, but Oregon is one of 4 states where you have to have a supermajority, a 2/3 quorum. You have to have actually a 2/3 quorum to pass bills on the Senate floor and on the House bill. And so whenever these cap and invest bills would come up to the floor, it would happen in June of 2019 and February of 2020, the Republicans would just flee the state, which actually made national news. You might have heard about this here. And so that made climate change a very contentious issue here in Oregon to this day, where there's many folks in urban areas as well as in rural areas that want action on climate change. But in the conservative areas, they did not like this cap and invest bill. So they fled the state. And so there's a lot of hard feelings on this. And it was really hard on me too. So I figured, what can I do to pick myself back up? So I started going for legislative endorsements for the federal bill starting in August of last year. And so I reached out to numerous Oregon legislators, and we're now up to 32 Oregon legislators who have now endorsed the Energy Innovation Carbon and Dividend Act, which has now led to a state resolution, which I'll talk about more in a moment.
Yeah, it's super exciting. And you both already touched on this a little, but is there anything else you want to share about the work you've done towards securing state legislative endorsements? And Beth, how about let's start with you?
Sure. You mentioned already, Keston, that I had put forth a challenge to CCL volunteers in my state. So I'll speak a little bit more about that. So as of late summer of last year, we had what I considered to be kind of a low number of endorsements, just 9 total, and I think maybe 2 or 3 of them were legislators at the time, and it just wasn't something that we had concentrated on. So at our August chapter meeting, and this is the Wilmington-Newark Chapter in Delaware, where I'm the group leader, I challenged my volunteers to double that number by the December lobby meetings. And I think the key phrase that I used that sort of caught on was I challenged them to imagine how it would feel and the impact it would make to go into those meetings and make that kind of announcement. We have doubled our number of endorsements since the last time we saw you. And so that really caught fire, especially among a group of about 10 really active volunteers who just embraced that. And I'm proud to say that they met that challenge within 1 month and then kept going. And it's an ongoing project to this day, although the pace has slowed a little bit. We now have 25 endorsements total, and 11 are local elected officials, including 6 Democrats and 3 Republican legislators. And one of those legislators is the Senate pro tem, so the top Democratic leader in our Senate. And we also signed on during this period a county councilwoman in our northern county who offered to sponsor a county resolution supporting the EICDA, which passed after a couple of weeks of intense work of drafting the resolution and then rallying members to contact their council representatives and to testify at that meeting where the vote was taken. And then after that happened, our elected county executives signed on as well. So that's our 11 total.
Wow, what an exciting initiative. And Brian, how about the work that you've done?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we have now 32 Oregon legislators who have endorsed the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So last September, there was one legislator I approached. Her name is Tiffany Mitchell, and she represents the northern Oregon coast. And she was not just satisfied endorsing the federal bill. She said, well, what else can I do? Can I write to my members of Congress? And I was like, well, heck yes. And then she said, can I introduce a resolution in the Oregon legislature for the Oregon legislator to ask Congress to pass the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act? And I said yes. And so what she did then is, and Tiffany and I have been in touch ever since then, she actually asked the Oregon Legislative Council, the lawyers that work at the state capitol, to draft the language for a resolution. And then what happened is I just went for the low-hanging fruit as far as getting legislator endorsements. It's just as many Democrats and friends I knew. But I had friends within Citizens Climate Lobby say, well, why aren't we working on Republicans? And it was great that I was able to motivate friends from what I was doing. And so they actually approached last November the Republican House Minority Leader, Christine Drazen, and she said that she was a big fan of the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act. So she asked, what could I do? And so she actually helped us draft the language of the resolution also. So it was a bipartisan resolution going into the Oregon legislature. It was actually introduced, this resolution, on February 4th by Democratic Senator Michael Dembrow, and then it worked its way through the Senate. And this was actually mentioned on the May Citizens Climate Lobby with Mark Reynolds. Our resolution actually passed the Oregon Senate by a vote of 23-5 on April 7th, with 6 Republican senators voting for it. And it's currently in the Oregon House. We just have a few days left remaining in the Oregon session. And so the cool thing is that on the House side now, we're now up to 27 co-sponsors in the Oregon House, which is 45% of the members of the Oregon House, and 5 are Republicans. So we're still working on the resolution on the House side here.
Wow, yeah. So given all that success you have, Brian, has the work that you've done with state legislators impacted your federal lobbying efforts at all?
That's a great question, Keston. And so what it's done is that I'm also the assistant liaison for our member of Congress, Earl Blumenauer. And so when we're going into our meetings, we've been telling our members of Congress about this, that we've been keeping them informed that we have a number of legislators who are paying attention and who do support the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act. So it's been an interesting conversation to have in our meetings with our congressional staff.
Yeah, thank you. And Beth, I'll pose the same question to you.
Yeah, we prepared some, I guess in normal times we would call them leave behind documents, but instead they're more send ahead documents that we have emailed to our legislators. starting with those December lobby meetings, and we've updated it for subsequent meetings, just listing and letting the legislators know who all is endorsing back at home. And it really did make an impression, and it fostered a good discussion about who else in the district and in the state would be most useful for us to talk to in the future. And we really think it has been one of the more meaningful ways that we've demonstrated to our members of Congress that we have their backs.
Yeah, and so it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity to engage with state legislators after they've made an endorsement. So Beth, what are some of the things you've done to maintain that relationship and continue to involve them?
Well, one thing, first and foremost, it's important to thank them copiously. And then we've done some things like invited some of our endorsers to attend our regional conference. We had one of our Republican endorsers speak at the 2020 Mid-Atlantic Regional Conference. And we're currently working on pulling together a joint op-ed with one of our volunteers and one of our senators and one of our local endorsers serving as co-authors. And we are, at first it was a little slow, but we are getting better about asking at our meetings with endorsers what they may be willing to do in the future, if they're willing to make a video or something like that in support of the bill. We've tried to keep them updated on where the bill stands as we move forward into the new Congress and when it was reintroduced. And we very often ask the endorser if they would be willing to open doors for us to additional meetings with their colleagues. And this has been especially important with Republicans since they have often had better knowledge of which of their colleagues are more likely to be supportive than we have. And one Republican that we've been in conversation with, but who hasn't yet endorsed, has nevertheless offered to get us in front of the Small Business Caucus, Republican Small Business Caucus in our House.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of good advice. Brian, do you have any other strategies that you use for engaging state legislators who've already endorsed?
Well, we're actually really deep in the weeds right now with our state resolution. So that's kind of where we're at the moment, but we're trying to see what's going to come of the state resolution. There's a lot of bills that is in the Rules Committee, so we may have to switch gears and actually do a letter to our member of Congress. So we may be going more that route, but that's kind of where we're at right now is what's going to be the final outcome of the resolution as far as like presenting that to our Oregon congressional delegation. So that's kind of ongoing conversation with the legislators right now.
Yeah, that's great. And we're just going to pivot a little bit because I know it's been a very long year and a half with COVID and everyone engaging in social distancing. And so what sort of things should we be thinking about as we safely transition back to in-person activities while we do this work? Brian, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, legislators, elected officials, they love meeting with constituents. And I know in Oregon, our legislative session ends on June 27th, and it may be, I don't know if it's how similar it is for other states. And when they're out of session, it's so much easier to meet with them. They love to meet with constituents for coffee. So I've had a number of meetings with my state representative or even senator on this here. So really try to do that if you can. My other big advice is, I don't know if you'll be able to see my sheet, attend town halls. You might not be able to see the way I wrote it out here. There's a website called townhallproject.com. And for 10 states, including Oregon, it'll actually show you which legislators are having town halls. You can also subscribe to your state representative and your state senator newsletter to attend their town halls. I even went on a legislative town hall this morning and got my question asked about our state resolution. So I can't say this big and loud enough. Attend town halls and try to meet with them for coffee.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Beth, do you have any other advice you'd like to share?
Sure. And when you can, try to take constituents with you to these meetings. It's not absolutely essential because state legislators, they're pretty used to meeting with representatives of organizations. So saying you're a representative of CCL can get your foot in the door, but it can really be helpful if constituents are there explaining why this topic is important to them. And that sort of just builds your power in the situation because those elected officials won't want to say no to their voters. So prepare for the meeting like you would any CCL lobby meeting with members of Congress. Do some research, starting with the website of the legislature, which can be very helpful, letting you know what issues are currently going on, what meetings they may be involved in, what legislation they're sponsoring. And then, make your plan, assign your roles, go in with a really sincere appreciation and have that clear ask, and remember to listen and answer questions. And one thing that we have also done, which works a little better in a virtual meeting, but could also work in a in-person meeting, is make short slide presentations, because a lot of state legislators haven't really been that well educated on the EICDA. So you kind of have to be prepared to talk about the basics. And we've made one version for Republicans and one for Democrats to sort of emphasize different aspects that would be appealing.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to transition to a little bit of Q&A. And so we have a question. What is the language you use to get a meeting with officials? Do you mention an endorsement of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act right off the bat? And Beth, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have often initiated the conversation with an email where we do include links to the website for the bill, and do mention that we are interested in seeking an endorsement, unless we feel that that would just be too scary, if we have done some research and think that that wouldn't be helpful. But in general, we've generally gone for the low-hanging fruit first. And we know in advance that this is going to be a pretty friendly meeting, at least so far. So it has been all right to mention that up front.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, do you have any other advice for that?
Yeah, so some of my tricks are, as I do send an email, and I have in my email a link to Citizens Climate Lobby and the federal bill. And then I also link the other endorsers that in Oregon. The hardest is the first one, but start with your own state legislator, your own representative, and your own senator. And so I send that to them in advance. And I've actually had legislators tell me that I am just way too busy to meet with you, but I'm more than happy to endorse. So I've gotten endorsements just from emails. Or what I do too is 24 hours before I meet with them, I send another email saying, hey, I'm so happy to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. This is what the meeting is about, and I'm hoping you will endorse the energy innovation. And I put a link to how to endorse in there. And I've had legislators start off the meeting with saying, hey, Brian, great to meet with you. And I already endorsed the bill. They've already even did it before I met with them. So we could just have a fun conversation that way.
Yeah, what a great strategy. Okay, we have another question in the chat. Have you ever asked the local government endorsers to speak to or write a letter to the federal representatives in support of the Energy Innovation Act or carbon pricing? And if so, how was that ask received? Brian, you want to take the first crack at this?
Well, I just kind of focused strictly on I've had tunnel vision with the state legislators just trying to endorse the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act, because I've had so much fun doing that. I'm still amazed by when Tiffany Mitchell's response, when she wanted to go above and beyond that, where she offered herself to write our U.S. senators and her U.S. representative here in Oregon. So it'll be amazing the spectrum of responses that you'll get. Some of them will need more information. Sometimes you need more than one meeting with them. Some of them, maybe it's just not within their political framework. And then, others will say yes right away. And some have even said to me, I'm just too busy to meet with you, but I will endorse this. So it just depends on when you're at. So some of them will be happy to write that letter to the member of Congress, and others are just strictly focused on state issues. And it's really hard to ask those folks because they don't want to be diverted their attention from working on the state policies that they are working on.
Right. Thank you. Beth, do you have any other thoughts on that?
We have not asked any of our legislators to do that. We've generally offered to be the bearer of the good news to our members of Congress ourselves, because we do realize that they're very busy. But that is a possibility if you know that they have a particularly close relationship, for example. That might be a good one to ask to do that. We did have our very first legislator did actually meet with us and then said, I've got to think about it for a little bit. And then we heard that he actually did have some conversations with our members of Congress, I think, to sort of, see what they felt about him doing this, and then came back and endorsed. So there has been some communication. Like I said, it's a small, cozy state and people talk.
Right. Okay, we have another question. Is it better to request an endorsement on a specific federal bill or to a general endorsement on carbon pricing, dividend, or the border adjustment? Brian, do you have any thoughts on?
I've just been really singularly focused on getting the legislators to endorse the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act because it's so easy to do. If you send them an email, there's actually a link that you can put in there and then they can endorse there. So that's what I've strictly been doing is the CCL's Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, just the bill itself. And then since we have the resolution, just trying to get the state legislators to co-sponsor and then vote for the state resolution. So that's where I've been strictly focused on.
Okay, and Beth, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm like Brian, we've really been focused mainly on the bill, although I did see some news that there is in the grasstops engagement tracker database now a way to add someone who wants to endorse carbon pricing. So that's kind of a new option. It hasn't really been there through much of the time of our project over these past 6 months or so.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. Where can I find examples of the materials you sent to state legislators in advance of your meetings? How about Beth? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share those with you if you send me an email. And I'm pretty sure that our tech help has put my email address into the chat. So look for it there and send me an email after the session and we'll send you some samples.
Okay, and Brian, is there anything that you use or that's maybe accessible through CCL?
Yeah, just a sample email that I've put together that I'm more than willing to share about what Citizens Climate Lobby is, our bill, who is endorsed, and how you can endorse also. That's basically and can I meet with you? And then that other email I sent after we've secured the meeting right before to get them to endorse. I'm more than welcome to share any of my emails that I've sent about that.
Okay, perfect. And we have about 2 minutes left, so I'll open the floor for closing remarks from our panelists. Beth, do you have any thoughts you want to share to close us off?
Yeah, I would just say that that there can be a lot of inertia if you're just at the beginning of doing this. There can be anxiety about making that first approach, but just realize that it's really fun and it can really energize your chapter. That's what we found. And it feels great to just watch your totals growing on that endorsement map on the bill website. And just to remember that your local elected officials work for you and aim to please their voters. And so that gives you an advantage. And if you don't get a yes right away, just keep following up with polite persistence, and you can often get to yes.
Okay, thank you. Brian, any final thoughts for our audience?
Yeah, Beth summed it up wonderfully here. And I would just add, this has just been so much fun doing this. The hardest is going to be the first one, and I would, but it's easy because you go to your own state representative and your own state senator, and oftentimes they really want to help you wherever they can since you're a constituent, and then try to meet with other state legislators if you can. They are looser about it, the members of Congress about it. And again, I highly recommend, if you can see the squeeze in here, attend town halls if you can for legislators. I did one this morning. I've gotten a lot of yeses for endorsements of the federal bill and also for our state resolution just by attending town halls.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today. If we didn't get to your questions, please feel free to post them in the forums on CCL Community. There should be a link in the chat for that. And if you're looking for an opportunity to apply some of this information that Beth and Brian shared, CCL is running a Meet with Your Mayor's campaign over the summer, and you can find more details about this initiative in the June action sheet. So thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.